Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello, welcome to this episode of Healing the Spirit. I am so delighted, so grateful, so excited to be sharing this incredible conversation with you. My partner in conversation today is Marika Hamahata Clymer, and in the past year, I've been studying Reiki with her, and she's taught me so much, and I'm going to introduce her in a little bit and you'll get to hear our conversation. But before I plunge into all of that, I want to first center what is in my heart as I am recording this today. If you are listening to this when this episode is released, it is the end of May 2022. We have just come out of eclipse season, and we're currently in the middle of Mercury retrograde. Jupiter is in Aries, and it has been really intense. I have been holding space for a lot of friends, for clients, for members of my community who have expressed to me how difficult this time has been for them and how stretched thin all of us are, and how it feels like we're kind of coming to the end of our capacity as humans. And I just want to acknowledge how real that is and how difficult it is to be human on this planet Earth at this moment right now. And if you are feeling not wonderful, if you are feeling like your practices, your tools, your self-care have not really helped you recently, I want to encourage you to not give up hope, and also at the same time to also acknowledge that so many of us are in the same soup as you are. And that there's nothing wrong with you. That whatever you are going through at this moment is part of your process. And that all the emotions that are coming up are real. And I feel like with everything that is going on, it looks like I'm seeing a lot of folks seeing this intensity in their personal lives, and for a lot of people in very, very real ways, whether that's physically, whether that's mentally or relationally. And I don't have any answers. I don't have any solutions. I don't even know if I really have any wisdom for any of you that I can share in a bite-sized way. And also, I want you to know that you are not alone. That many people are feeling resonances to what you are currently going through. And that support is available, that there are humans and non-human allies, ancestors, guides who are here to help you through this journey. And from my heart, I just want to say that I hope that you don't give up on that hope. And that you continue to breathe and remind yourself, as astrology always reminds me, that nothing lasts forever. That this moment that we're currently in will pass and there will be other challenges, but that this particular moment, in its glory, in its brutality, will pass. I also want to acknowledge all the shootings that have been happening in the US. And the US is not the world. I know that there are other places that are also experiencing war, experiencing challenges and difficulties. And also the US is the land that I'm currently on, the land that I'm currently calling home. So I'm allowing for this grief that many of us are feeling in this moment to be present with us and to hold space for that. And to trust that we have the capacity to transmute this. Thank you. I hope that that was a message that resonated with some of you. And that felt like something that I really needed to acknowledge and to say in this moment. So I'm going to read you Marika's short and sweet bio to introduce her into the space. Marika Hamahata Clymer, she, her, is a healer, teacher, birth attendant, and mother who inhabits Occupied Duwamish Territory, or also known as Seattle, Washington. Of Indigenous Ainu, Japanese, mixed European lineages, Marika's practice is emergent of her ancestral communities, including people, plant, animal, and land. Something that I've been learning from Marika in this container that she has been nurturing since the past year, called Foundations of Energetic Ecology, is how our energetic practices are rooted in the ways that we live, the ways that we see the land, and the ways that we relate to one another. And so it is complex because we are complex human beings. And so I feel like I've been so grateful to be in this container because Marika is a facilitator who's really not shied away from any of the complexity of being human. And in that sense, it has been a very powerful experience to be in this container with other seekers, other healers, other humans who are curious about what it means to build their own energetic practices for their own personal and collective healing. Some of the themes that we explore in this conversation has to do with the body and what it means to be witnessing the body as if it was an ecology, and taking the time as a practitioner to really understand our own bodies as well as the bodies of others, rather than rushing to diagnosis or clearing or pathologizing. We also spoke a lot about what it means to have a practice that is based in the idea of returning to the land, and how returning to the land itself is an embodiment practice. this is something that I personally feel that in the West, due to our history of colonialism and capitalism, extraction has been so internalized within all of us, this way of forcing our bodies to fit into a narrative, right, that is upheld by the collective and that may not be in alignment with who we actually are, what our ancestors have passed down to us. I edited very little of this conversation. It is truly a meandering, exploratory conversation, and I'm, listening back, really glad that Marika opened up about her own journey so transparently and so beautifully and so eloquently. And it is such a gift for me to have this conversation with her. And if you have a chance, I invite you to listen to this conversation while you are outside. If you are in the United States, the summer is drawing closer and closer to us. And so perhaps the weather is permitting you to take a walk while you're listening to this conversation. And if that's the case, I highly, highly encourage it. So I'll let you get to my conversation with Marika, and I hope that you enjoy this conversation. Thank you. Welcome to the podcast, Marika.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. As you know, your program has just been so very important to me, and it's been profoundly shifting to be learning from you in the past year. So I'm excited. I'm so honored to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been such an honor to witness you in all of your brilliance and just how beautifully supportive you are to our overall container, to everyone that's in our student community.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I like to begin these conversations with a question, which is, who do you know, sense, or feel yourself to be in this chapter of your journey?
I'm a little all over right now. I really am. I feel like I am really holding a lot of space the past few weeks for this kind of big, overwhelming sense of death. And, of course, on the other side of that coin, rebirth, but not really being at the birthing stage yet.
Yeah.
But I do know that one of the things that brings me really deep purpose, and one of the things that I am having to walk through kind of this death period for, is, the work, the healing work, the medicine work. And so I do know myself to be a healer, and right now that is kind of the only thing that has been giving me purpose. And I do know myself to be in intimate relationship with the land. Yesterday on like an Instagram story, I was like, the land is my primary partner. And so, I do feel like that allows me to give myself compassion in a different way, because I know that, the land loves me and cherishes me just as I cherish it. Um, and yeah, and I know myself to be very, a lot of other things, some things that I hold with a lot of skill and a lot of tact, and other things that I do not.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that I really love about learning from you is just how beautifully transparent you are with your own process all the
Yeah.
time. And that, to me, that's so important because it's almost like an active dismantling of this idea that being a healer looks any one way, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that, like, being a healer does not mean, like, that we can expand our understanding of what a healer means to include not knowing what the hell we're doing.
And that maybe that's even part of the healing, right?
Yeah.
Of letting go of the desire to know with such certainty, you know?
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear if you feel like sharing, um, maybe begin with your sun moon rising,
Yeah.
but also how did you come to this point, you know, as a Reiki healer? I know you're also a mother, a farmer.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear about all of it.
My sun, moon, and rising. So I'm a Scorpio sun and a Gemini moon and a Gemini rising. So a lot of water and a lot of air. I think part of what encourages my transparency in how I communicate with my students and everyone, is that with that Scorpio energy, just a constant, kind of shift that's always happening in our energy and in the things that, we hold to be true. The moment that we kind of settle into that truth, we are thrust into a new way of being that requires the journey to seek for what is now true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's all of the Gemini, all the air. But yeah, my journey, I think, just like so many people, it kind of begins with being very close to source, being really close to spirit and the land. And, as I grew older, kind of growing away from it. But I began to kind of consciously seek it. I always feel like there's this beautiful dichotomy between unconsciously drifting away and then making that conscious choice to walk a path back towards the light or to source. And so that kind of conscious path began for me again about 10 years ago. And it was all in the same month. I got pregnant with my son. I got my Reiki certification. And I also kind of began this journey in farming, which at the time seemed like the more quote unquote responsible way to make a living.
Yeah.
And I ended up, continuing to, and honestly, focusing like my livelihood on farming allowed me the spaciousness that I personally needed to explore my own practice, my own personal energy healing practice, my own spiritual practice, ancestral practice. And it was hard, I did farming and also supporting farm businesses for 7 years, and from row crop organic vegetable farming to farming mushrooms and, animals, chickens, turkeys, that sort of thing. And while I was making my living farming, and I say making my living very loosely, through which I mean, living very month to month, working like 2 or more jobs for most of that time that I was farming in order to survive here in the Seattle area. I also saw clients a few times a month. And, I didn't really have the financial resources to make that step into transitioning into like a full-time business, I guess, quote unquote business. I can't even say business, but just like transitioning my livelihood to my healing work.
Right.
And allowing my healing work to fully sustain me and take care of me financially until 2020, because I received unemployment and I had like 3 months of rent in my bank account, which I had never had before. And I was like, okay, we're going to do this. And since I had been doing the work for so many years, and with everything being virtual, I ended up just kind of going into teaching somehow. It just kind of happened that way, where I was sharing things about Reiki. And I actually started my quote unquote business as a birth attendant, and I wanted to be a birth worker.
Right.
And it was just kind of this offhanded post that I had made about Reiki that just blew up. And so from there, I hosted a few small workshops on, just talking about the disparities, I guess, between what I would understand to be a more traditional practice informed by my own lineages versus what I call just like the Western Reiki model.
Right.
Yeah. And so now we're kind of coming to a place now where I can start doing in-person work again, and in a different way than I ever have before, which means having like a space. So I'm speaking to you from my home office / healing space, which in the past I've always just gone to clients' homes, and we are definitely on the threshold of a lot of change for myself and for my healing work. And I will say that, because my work has evolved to, it wanted to be named something, which is energetic ecology. And, even though I say that like all those years I spent farming was like me supporting myself and finding something that felt aligned, I know that in the farm work, in tending to the land for those years, that really informed my understanding of the land, of ecology, of how energy is transferred from, the sun and the sky and the water and the earth.
Right.
Yeah. So I feel like that was a very important part of my path, was not separate from the work that I do now in a lot of ways. And also wanting to name my father, who spent so much time with me as a child, taking me fishing and hunting every day.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like what I meant when I said that we kind of start out being very close to the source, and then we kind of drift away, which I think I stopped going fishing and hunting with my dad regularly when I when I got into middle school. And we would still go, but just not nearly as much. And I probably gave him a lot of grief around it, like, oh, this is so boring, you know? So, and that's been really nice to just begin starting to incorporate like those things that my dad taught me as well, into my work, as well as like in the embodied actions of, you know, preparing to hunt, you know, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. What was the transition like for you, kind of on an internal basis, from doing farming work into mostly doing, especially during the pandemic, teaching online?
Yeah. Ooh, I
It was
know.
probably a very strange transition, right?
Yeah, it really was. I mean, and I, really, it was a matter of health as much as it was a matter of like spiritual health for me. I had known for probably a few years now that I had wanted to get out of farming, at least being a farm laborer, you know, and it was really the last 2 years of mushroom farming that I was just like, I fucking hate this. Every single moment, you know, I would go to work and just like really try to have a good attitude, you know, accept that that was where I was. But I would always have to end up going back, you know, to farming, no matter, you know, how many times I've tried to like transition out of it.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it's not anything against mushroom farming. It just really, you know, it kind of took away the one thing that that made farming itself bearable for me, which is like being outside. Because with agricultural mycology, you're like in a greenhouse for 8 hours a day. So I knew that there was like a spiritual deficit that was happening with me doing that type of work. But then my health started to respond pretty aggressively to the spores of the mushrooms, actually. And so I would come home from work and like not be able to breathe. I would have a fever. I would have body aches, chills, and like almost be hallucinating, like having such a high fever that I would start kind of passing out and or just like very coming in and out of reality.
Wow.
And when I finally figured out what it was, I had to start wearing like a chemical respirator at work.
Yeah.
8 hours a day. So before, you know, and that was just like, I don't know if that was, I think it was a few months before the mask mandate started that I was already wearing like a chemical respirator 8 hours a day, which was awful. And so, yeah, then that transition of like receiving unemployment, and moving into healing work, quote unquote, but really the teaching and the virtual stuff, you know, mentally and emotionally, I think I just didn't really know what was going on. I couldn't really, you know, I was cognizant and aware of what was happening, and constantly surprised by just the support that I received from the spiritual community. And, you know, it's like everybody's support and their desire to hold space and listen to me is what has made this all possible. And, you know, as you have heard many times before in the program, me being like, well, I've only been teaching for, you know, however long, it's been like a year.
Yeah.
I guess as of like September of this year, it'll be 2 years kind of. But I think for me, as otherworldly as the transition seemed, you know, dealing with a lot of my own bodily and emotional insecurities around stability and money and, all of those kind of things. Like, is this really happening? How long is it going to happen for? And it's only really been the last few months in preparing my space, my healing space, where I've really claimed kind of ownership over, and not even ownership, but just like very deep acceptance that, like, yes, like, this is the work that I am supposed to be doing, and I will be supported in whatever way I need to be supported in order to continue the work. I can't keep using financial insecurity as an excuse to keep me away from doing healing work. That I have to, commit regardless of what might happen, and anything that does happen, any obstacles that might arise, are simply tower variables, in that things that are meant to clear away, to create space for me to continue my own and deepen my own relationship with my practice and with the work. And so that has brought with it a lot of surrender, a lot of surrender to any of the changes that might happen, and changes that are happening right now. It really has been only the last few months where I've come to that kind of acceptance, like, okay, we're not going back, we're not going back to doing farm work or, working another service job or whatever. Like, this is who we are. This is what we do. And and I think in a big way, how I kind of made sense of that whole time of what was happening as I was like sharing and things were just blowing up and all of that, was that, like, my ancestors were just like, look, you can't hide yourself anymore. You can't just have your practice be to yourself and to this really small community. There's this really beautiful thing, and that is to say that, like, my in-person or my client work specifically for healing, I only do in person. And so I'm kind of making this connection right now, like, oh, there is a reason why, why I had such a big reach, is like my ancestors, or the spirits that guide me, or the spirits that guide our collective spiritual container, wanted there to be exposure there. And I think I need to find a different way to honor that, other than the teaching in the format that I do right now. But kind of them giving me no choice, but to continue to follow the work. That's kind of how I made sense of that time, was like, I wasn't given any other option. My health was in jeopardy. My spirit was deteriorating from doing work that I did not love. The ancestors kind of created these opportunities that I've continued to, like, rise to meet. But I don't think that those opportunities would have existed without them,
I really would love to come back to this point about teaching and how that's kind of impacted your work. But for a moment, I kind of feel like maybe we can step back and look at the bigger picture a little bit, because your program is called Energetic Ecology, which I think is just such a beautiful name. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about what energetic ecology means to you. and also what it means for us to be energetic ecologists, as people who work with energy, who are reclaiming the, I think of energy almost like our original language, you know, our mother tongue as humans.
Totally. Absolutely. Absolutely. I kind of say, like, I personally believe that like energy work was the original form of healing work for all civilizations. And that is totally unfounded, ungrounded in anything, but I do believe it. You know, it's like who taught us how to use plants? You know, plants did.
Exactly.
Through energy, you know, and through their communication. What the words you just used to describe it, the mother tongue, is feels really, really highly in alignment. Originally, the kind of container through which my work has been shared with the world was Moon House Northwest, and I knew that was just kind of a placeholder, but I didn't know, you know, when the new name was going to come. But it was very clear to me that the work and, you know, the medicine was asking to be called Energetic Ecology. It just took, you know, like a year of me having to articulate my work to people, you know, like, like it's like my work is my work and it's in me, but the act of having to actually like pull this thread and like, you know, describe the color and the texture and how it became thread in the first place, all of those things, to bring that into like an intellectual awareness. It's through teaching that I've been able to really understand my medicine from like a cognitive point of view.
Right.
And I did struggle a little bit with using the word ecologist because, you know, Western science has such a, there's a, you know, that's a loaded word. Ecology, in the field of science but at the same time, I understand that it's almost like a reclamation, because to be a human is to be an ecologist. When I think about how I go to the places that I collect plant medicines from, and being in relationship with those lands, for, you know, some of the places are literally places that my parents would take me for before I even have memory. You know, there are pictures of me in some of these places with like my godparents and, you know, my parents and my brother and extended family, and how we witness the land over time and over the seasons. You know, we as humans have this ability to kind of to keep track, you know, to document, and documenting, whether that be through oral history or through, you know, written documentation, what we see in the land changes over time, you know, fires that happen, years where it's cold, particularly late, you know, and I'm always kind of going back in my records and saying, okay, well, I harvested yarrow on this date, but this year it's like a little bit later, and, you know, why is that? And those are all very human things, but those are also things that we would be taking into account if we were a quote unquote ecologist, you know? Right. It's like the most human thing for us to do. In a lot of ways, I feel like we provide almost an executive function for Mother Earth and for the planet through our ability to remember, you know, years past, and not just in a way, you know, with our bodies, you know, animals can remember things that happen to them, but they don't really know why, and we like to think of that as being like kind of trauma responses and things like that. But for us as humans, human animals, I really do feel that our ability to witness the land and the plants and everything over time is one of our very special and unique gifts. And in this way, we can also witness our own bodies, and we can also witness our own spirits and the way that energy moves through our body. And so that's kind of, and because how energy expresses itself through the human body for my own intuitive languages comes in a very ecological way. Then that's kind of where the words energetic ecology comes from, because I do see our bodies as ecosystems, collections of organisms that are in relationship with one another, And so the other kind of side of that coin of what ecology might mean in this context is the tending and the caring for the body in that way, not in a way of like, oh, this thing is bad or this thing is good or there's a blockage here, or not to holding almost like this non-dual witnessing of the body, in the same way that we might witness natural phenomena,
and not pathologizing.
Right, not pathologizing. And then there's also the animism that's really, really a huge part of that too, because we might deify the forces that create earthquakes or tsunamis. We might understand those natural phenomena to be expressions of spirits much bigger than us, spirits so big that only large swaths of land can hold them. But we're not, we don't necessarily assign morality to those spirits. And oftentimes we see those earthquakes or, just things that happen, natural disasters as messages, as ways of communicating. And in the same way, we can do that with our own bodies, witness what our body is doing as a way of communicating with us. And that our body is a collection of spirits that all have their own thoughts and feelings and experiences of our lives.
Yes. As you were speaking, the words that kept coming to me was this idea that the body itself is also a land, right?
Yeah.
And that it's part of an extension of the land we're living in, the land we came from, and it's an amalgamation.
Absolutely. I know. Yeah. The thought of like, the spirit of a mountain being so big that only a mountain can contain it, is really special and sweet. And I think the same is true for our bodies. Our spirits are only so big that, they're contained within a human body. And that's okay. But I love what you said there as far as, our bodies being lands. Literally. Yeah.
How would you contextualize your Reiki education, your Reiki practice
Mm.
and then your Reiki teaching into this framework of energetic ecology. And I guess specifically, I'm curious about how your exploration of Reiki has led you to this idea of energetic ecology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, so I received my training, quote unquote, my training within the Western kind of model of things in 2013. And for me, that was a really big moment, a very significant moment in my life where I felt like I was stepping towards something that was like my lifelong path.
Yeah.
And but there were a lot of things about my training that I didn't really understand. Like I understood cognitively, and there were a lot of things that I was really excited about. I felt like I was getting an education in, all of these like very spiritual woo-woo things that I was very interested in at the time, like chakras and crystals and, energy, and all of that. And I think it was really the exploration into my own lineages that kind of planted the seed for this ecological framework. And particularly in the way that I teach, I kind of teach from this framework of Ichirei Shikon, which is a Koshinto or ancient Shinto framework that the body and all of existence has one spirit but four souls. And how these four souls are manifested are through earth, water, fire, and air. And that exploration, I would say, began a number of years, probably like 5 or 6 years after I had gotten my original certification, because I had to go through a very deep process of like divesting from everything that I had been taught about Reiki, everything that I had been taught about how energy looks and feels and moves throughout the body. I think we don't quite understand how impactful what we take in as like education or knowledge is on how we see and understand our own bodies and our own selves. Because for a long time, even after I had quote unquote kind of divested from using the chakra system, the way that energy was communicating to me in my body was still very much like the chakra system. It's almost like I downloaded this software for my body to learn how to communicate with me, because that was the language or the way in which I coded it to speak to me.
Yeah.
And once I started saying no to that and creating space, that's when all of this other stuff kind of came through. And I would say that a big part of that process has been in the like reclamation of my Ainu heritage and my Ainu lineage.
Yeah.
And so, it's definitely a combination of both looking more into Shinto, which is the traditional folk animist kind of spiritual system in Japan, but then also looking into and deeply embodying my Ainu ancestors who have taught me a lot. And I'm very selective about what I share and teach with others that like comes from my Ainu lineage versus my Japanese lineage. And, it's kind of for that reason that primarily what I teach is, based off of the frameworks that I have learned through studying Japanese spirituality and religion. So I think those things had a lot to do with it. And also just lots of time out on the land, you know, lots and lots of time. I've always been someone who, like, if I have an hour, you know, I'll go and drive down to the beach. Like I will. And, or, you know, as much as I was working, if I had even a day off or a few days off, going out to the peninsula or, you know, to Eastern Washington and to the mountains. And, you know, that has been such a huge part of my spiritual practice, that I don't think you can teach to anyone, really.
Yeah.
And it's like the land taught me about, you know, how to understand energy in my body, how to use that to heal other people. Yeah. So, you know, it's like I've had Reiki teachers, I've had meditation teachers, I have had taken all kinds of training and courses, and yet none of those have really taught me what I know about healing, you know, and what I know about my own medicine, and how to work with my own medicine, more than the land has.
Wow. I'm just so moved hearing that. I was just out on a walk right before we recorded this conversation, and I think this is the first time since I moved to New York in 2007 that I've really truly appreciated like the sprouting of spring. You know, I looked up and saw these beautiful tall trees growing in Brooklyn that has been barren for months, and now it's just suddenly singing with leaves. You know, that bursting of the life force, corresponding to how, for example, a few days ago on Sunday, I am not a morning person, and I just woke up at 7 a.m. in the morning, feeling that spring energy like rising up through my leg channels, like into my belly, into my hara, you know? And I think your program has really helped me solidify that understanding and that relationship, and how it's just such an intimate relationship that we have been taught to forget, and we've been conditioned to almost, it's like a systemic amnesia, you know? Of like being stuck in apartment buildings, being stuck in office spaces, and forgetting that that connection exists. But all we have to do is really just remember it, right? It's always within, and we're always interacting with this world outside of us too. So, yeah.
That's so beautiful to hear. Just that, like, waking up and feeling that spring energy coming through your feet up to your belly is so beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, and I would say that even for those of us who, you know, have wanted to divest our energy from like these more structural systems of like capitalism and, you know, racism and all of the things, you know, we've turned to spirituality as an answer to you know, the problems that we see in the world. And yet even in the spiritual kind of community, a lot of the time when I've seen or witnessed kind of quote unquote embodiment practices or meditation practices, it's all about connecting to like the energy of the universe, you know, and the energy that's like up there. And not so much about there's almost like this quiet dismissal of things that we consider low vibration, which would be like earth energies that are very dense, or things like that, of that nature. And it's also helped me, like, returning to the land in this way has helped so much with my own personal embodiment. And I'm very thankful. I'm thankful that it's helped other people. Yeah.
Something that was really, I remember we had this conversation in one of our community practice, I believe, pretty early on, that was really moving for me, was this idea you brought forward. Because I think my question had been, you had been teaching us this beautiful hara breathing technique. And as I was coming into greater embodiment of my body, it almost felt like I was reaching, like I was kind of in a trance at the same time. And that was something that caused like a bit of a cognitive dissonance in my head, because unconsciously I had been at that point buying into this idea that spirituality has to be this ascension thing, and I think even if I know intellectually that's not true,
Yeah.
my body still thinks that, or my being still somehow is still invested in that in some sort of subconscious way. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's beautiful. I feel like so much of our desire to ascend different, like, states of consciousness and all, and find greater purpose and everything like that. It's like, we similar to what you said earlier, like, we don't have to go out, we just have to go more deeply in, and finding deeper presence in the moment, which, speaking for myself, like, I struggle with every day, just like everybody else,
Right.
Yeah. And it's really nice to have conversations like this, because they can kind of help me kind of pull myself out of my head, or get my head out of my ass, and actually just be present, and seek that presence, and seek, just the unfolding.
I want to pull a thread that you kind of put out there a moment ago about, reclaiming one's calling as a healer, especially in this environment, in this collective landscape that has been colored by capitalism, by colonialism, and I believe it was one of your teachers, Miranda Bennett, who said that there are these predatory forces, right, in the collective landscape we live in, that seeks to exploit these gifts, that seek to dilute them, or forces that are not for the remembering of what our truth really is, as children of Mother Earth.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it definitely has been trending, that, to become like a healer. Like, what does that even mean? I feel that, those predatory forces, they definitely work through all of us in some ways. It's part of what makes this work so challenging, is trying to, be embodying a future that isn't quite yet fully integrated into the now, while still also holding a lot of the vibrations of these ways of thinking and doing and being, that have been conditioned into us, that like we are literally, you know, as much as I kind of poo-poo on like bad vibes, or like, you know, this concept of vibrations, it's like everything really is vibration. And we really do hold a lot of the vibrations for these extractive ways of being within us. And it takes a lot of conscious work. It's a practice every day to not do that. And yeah, I don't know what else I would be, you know, on this earth if not a healer. But I do feel that right now we are experiencing kind of clouds in the collective of what we as individuals define as purpose. Mm-hmm.
I want you to explore more about that. I'm curious to hear this.
Yeah. I think that we as individuals, there's like such a culture of like toxic individuality in, you know, the Western world. And I think a lot of people want to define what their purpose is for themselves rather than having spirit or ancestors tell them, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, it feels really good to be like, I'm a healer, you know, that feels good. There are so many good things associated with that, but I don't feel that that is ours to claim for ourselves. That isn't ours to be like, I want to be a healer, and so I'm going to go take this course or do this thing and then be a healer. I really feel that there are certain roles, I think all roles, but particularly the role of a healer is not one that is ours to claim as much as it is one that we are given. You know? And yeah, I feel like we all want to define what our purpose is, you know, and I think for some people, their fate is to define what their purpose is. But I almost feel like it's a lack of trust in spirit when we can't let spirit guide us to what our purpose is, you know, or we have to like put all of this energy and effort into creating that to like be our purpose, so to speak. While it might feel good, and for me, when I first got started with my journey, I mean, I was over the moon for being able to call myself a Reiki healer. You know, it felt like the perfect label for what I was and who I was. But now the longer that I've done this work, I feel regretful for saying this, but it really is a burden. You know?
Yeah.
It really is. It really is. I look at some healers that, and I am afraid for what opening my doors for client work again is, now that that's all I'm doing. You know, I'm not doing client work sometimes, but my full-time living is farming. I see, you know, some healers that I respect so much who just, they give everything. You know, they're so available. And I think that there are ways to be a healer that is doing the work and serving the community without being a detriment to ourselves.
Absolutely.
But I also do recognize that level, that intensity of availability is required, of really honoring our position as healers within the community. Like that's what I mean when I say it really is a burden. You know, our time is not ours. Our body is hardly ours, you know. when I'm working with clients, even when I'm working, even the community the student community, it's like I hold a lot of space for y'all's ancestors,
Yeah.
like
Right.
all the time.
Right.
And it's the same is true for our body, like with my body when I'm in ritual. My body is not mine. My body belongs to the spirits that give medicine through me, as well as to like the ancestors of the clients that I'm working for, the spirits of the land. It is, being a healer isn't all about feel good stuff. And I would say, even speaking for myself, the past few weeks, like I think we went through in class, a few weeks ago, we had a really big conversation around like, you think the work is going to get easier because you've been doing it longer, you've been through the cycle enough times, been chewed up, spit out, and put yourself back together enough times that you think it's going to be easier, and it just gets harder. So we hold a lot. We hold a lot as healers. We have to. We have literally no choice. And I think I've given myself a lot of grief around my habitual use of tobacco, but I realize that now that I'm in my own healing space, when I'm doing healing work, I'm constantly working with the spirit of tobacco in my healing work. And it kind of just occurred to me not very long ago that I was like, yeah, I've been in relationship with tobacco for over 10 years, and like they are one of my primary partners. But also that like, yeah, the reason why is because I'm always in these fucking depths, man. And I was just like, sometimes I just want to be out of it.
Yeah. I hear your Scorpio sun there.
Exactly. It's like, exactly like we just are not allowed to take our foot off the pedal, and I don't think that a lot of people really understand that level of responsibility and that level of energetic exchange when they think that they want to be a healer, or even just understanding like what our healing is, what our medicine is. And that's what's been so freaking beautiful about the program, and witnessing all of you, is because getting to witness like how you all are finding your own medicines, how you are defining those in words and not in words. It is so beautiful. And I just feel so honored because I don't think that I have not seen a program out there that really holds space in that way. Like I don't know that I've ever seen a Reiki program where like the end result isn't to just pump out a bunch of Reiki healers, because that's not what I'm doing, and that feels really cool.
Yeah, something I noticed and observed in our container too is how radically honest everyone is with themselves, but also in community around where they are in their own healing journey and where they are in their reclamation, remembering of their healing path, and even a recognition of maybe not everyone is supposed to be a healer, but everyone is on a healing journey of some sort.
Yes, absolutely. 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 And that like we as humans, are healing, that our relationships are healing. And I think similarly, I feel very honored to hold a container for people who are really there for their own personal practice, as well as for like the possibility of expanding practice out to the community, or folks who already have had a practice, that's been so special. But even, even just talking to Madison this morning, about some pretty big, deep stuff. And Madison was just like, yeah, I can't fix any of that for you, and I knew that like Madison was the person that I needed to talk to, because I think in her words, because at the end of the phone call, I was like feeling better, and she was just like, yeah, look at that. Like, look at what holding space for like not fixing somebody else's problems can do,
Right.
Isn't that amazing? And so I think if anything, the program itself, but also just in general, a healing journey creates more opportunity, creates more skills for us to be more healing people for ourselves, but also for our loved ones and for our immediate communities, our families, people that we meet on the street. I really do feel like a spiritual journey, hopefully just makes us a better person all around. So
absolutely. Yeah. I am curious to hear from you about the idea of community and about creating a program and a community that holds space for each person's unique individual medicine that really comes from their own positionality and their lived experience, their both spiritual and blood lineage, and also kind of working for collective liberation, and in the process dismantling this idea of the guru mentality, right? That is so rampant in our culture. It's just so interesting when I think about our culture and our obsession towards youth, towards power, and towards like individual figures. It is just so fascinating how limiting that is, right?
yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like, I don't know, something that I was kind of sensing throughout our conversation is this idea that we weren't even supposed to hold it by ourselves. We are supposed to do this together, as a community, right? And I feel like the container you've built and that you've nurtured in the past year has been so beautiful, because I've really seen such, like, I've never seen such level of authenticity, from everyone. Like, it's like we're so real, and sometimes in the middle I'm like, we are too real.
Yeah, when I start smoking cigarettes on the Zoom calls, I think we're a little too real. Sometimes I think about that. I'm like, there's like a certain level of professionalism that should probably be a bare minimum. But also, like, we often really get into it. Like, that's what I say is like, tobacco is one of my main spirits that I work with when I'm doing medicine work, and the medicine work doesn't have to look like me being in ritual. Like, that can be having a conversation and just holding and channeling medicine,
Right.
through intellectual, conversations. Yeah. And I would say that like the kind of guru mentality is not unique to Western culture.
That's a good point.
Yeah, in the ways that like the word guru itself comes from, the Hindu tradition, as far as I know, I think. And I would say the same for some aspects of Japanese, culture as well. Like if we look at, it's interesting because if we look at the history of Reiki and Sensei Asui, he was one of many people teaching energetic healing in Japan at the time, between like the 1890s and like 1920s. And it wasn't until one of his students brought it to the United States that he really became kind of like, they like Jesusified him, you know, where they like canonized him is, I think, the more appropriate word, as far as kind of making him be this just omnipotent kind of figure, this person who birthed Reiki, you know, the very first one ever, and all of this like mysticism around who he was and what he did. And so I would say that definitely, you know, especially in American culture, we have a way of doing that. It's interesting, because there's almost like what I think is really interesting about Japanese culture is that, you know, when Western, and I think this is the same for a lot of traditional earth-based cultures, where what we call kami or spirits, you know, Westerners, the only way that they can understand our relationship to that thing is by saying that like those are our gods. But when we really look at what kami are, typically, and especially the most like venerated quote unquote kami, they were really just ancestors. They were people who lived and walked on the earth, you know, who did things, you know, and did good deeds or did not do good deeds. They were just people. They were not, you know, gods. But speaking to the other layers of what you were talking about, you know, I don't know why. I don't know why that intention was set, you know, in the container from the very, very beginning, you know. You know, I think one thing that really was present in my mind as you were speaking around like how I've created this container, it's like, it's as if I was so intentional and thought for hours about every little detail of how I was going to work things out. And the truth, I think, is that I've just created a lot of space in that container to hold for my own journey, you know, and not keeping that behind closed doors to all of you, because I don't know. One of my students and colleagues, Maya, they are on Instagram at Hallowed Well, or Hollowed Well. They have a practice on the East Coast. You can't like create a community that is set on liberation if everything about the environment is oppressive, or like that you can't create an anti-oppressive community while using oppressive tools, was something along those lines. And I felt like that was really a really great kind of capture of what I've kind of tried to do the best that I can. It doesn't always work, you know, it doesn't always work. I think people, especially in a student teacher kind of context, there's a lot of weird kind of energetic exchanges or an energetic patterning in the student teacher relationship that I find problematic, particularly in like Western, but also in Eastern, like, you know, ways of relating. And I wanted to begin the process of destroying that, you know. And I honestly have like the Black Panthers to thank for that, because I was reading a lot of Huey P. Newton's work when I was first beginning like creating the kind of foundations for the program. And so that's kind of where like the mutual aid fund came from. It's where some other things came from. And I also in 2020 was witnessing the failures of the way that quote unquote liberation, like liberatory practice was happening in Seattle, from just witnessing, my involvement or friends' involvement with the quote unquote movement. And not anything bad, just like contradictions, just contradictions that really contradictions in ideology versus practice, which don't we all deal with that, but I think for me, it was particularly because I wasn't able to be as involved as some people who are really, really close to me were, because of being a parent and all of that, that I was able to see, like, here's this person who's being lifted up by the community to lead the community, and yet they're still exhibiting very authoritarian, behaviors.
Yeah.
And, how can I lead a community and position myself in a way that that I don't do that, And I think what you said was so beautiful, that like there's something really special about walking on a path with other people and like having relationships with those people and witnessing those people over time, that we can all kind of be come into the container with the intention of like collective liberation, and that we all have our own paths to really understanding what that means for us.
Yeah.
I think that was just a really beautiful way of summarizing like why we should be in a program, or why we should be in a community like that. Because, I think so much of what I do is like telling people that I don't have the answer and that they have the answer, so much of what I do is just that, like me being like, or even in class on this past week where I was just like, that's not really the point. Like I intentionally am giving you all these tools as kind of these separate things that you all have to put together.
Yeah.
And it's the way that you cognitively put it together, but then it's also the medicine that ties the thread between all of those things. But I can't give you that. Like that is for you to put those pieces together, and for you to figure out like in what ways you work with energy for the purposes of healing, if you intend on healing others. But, from our intuition to everything else, it's always been, really less of me telling you what to do and more of me just creating space and containers and opportunities for you all to lead yourselves through, and make note of what comes up. Which I know has probably... I know that I've heard from many people in the program just how uncomfortable my curriculum has been, and the way that my curriculum has kind of happened, where, I'm just constantly at mercy with what will work best for me, like my schedule, my neurodivergencies, my capacity. And you have all held me through and witnessed me through some very deep changes, from, my grandmother passing away to moving and, having friendships, long-term relationships in my life come to an end. And that the absolute fluidity and the mutability of the way that I teach has been uncomfortable, but also very liberating for folks, because it really takes the pressure off of like what it means for them to be a quote unquote good student.
Yeah.
And literally the only expectation is that you show up. You show up and like you can meet me wherever you're at, and I'm going to meet you all wherever I'm at, which is constantly in the sauce, constantly in the sauce. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I myself deal with a lot of conflict around how I've shown up to the space, and wanting it to be different, but also understanding that like I can't really change, who I am. It's more about like learning how to hold a container that allows for me to show up in the best way that I possibly can. And allows me to like channel the medicine in the best way that I can, which has also meant like divesting from what we even understand to be like a quote unquote curriculum or a quote unquote program.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What I found in your program was that when we allow our lives to start teaching us and to start teaching one another, especially with regards to energy work, something really magical happens, and we talk a lot about in the program the sanctity of our own medicine. And I think that that's where we get to a point where it's not possible for people to even steal each other's medicines.
Yes. I think what we're finding, and I'm going to repeat the words that you said so that listeners hear them again, that becoming in touch with the sanctity of our own medicine makes it almost impossible for us to like steal one another's medicine. And I think that is so beautiful. It's like when the program started, and the word container for the program last year, as well as the beginning of this year, was energetic sovereignty. And I think being in this year-long container with all of you has allowed us to really come to an much deeper understanding of what that means.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And just how important the sovereignty of that which is sacred, and because and you're right, because it is true, like we are all kind of coming to this place where we're beginning to define what our medicine is and what our practice is and what our practice looks like. And I have no insecurities that a student in the program is going to take, what another person's practice looks like or any of that to go try to do it themselves, It feels very just so beautiful and so sovereign. I don't know if there's any other way to really describe it. And I think similarly, a lot of the students in the program, or at least I can speak for those that I've witnessed, week after week after week, that we feel the same way about the land, and it's not just about each other's medicines as like a student cohort, but also has really informed how we interact with the world, and how we interact with the medicines of the land and the plants and the animals that are in our lives. It's really, really special, really, really special, and very unique. I don't know. It's just, yeah.
It's beautiful. Yeah. So, I can talk to you all day, Marika, but I want to honor your time. So as we wind to a close, I'm curious if you could just briefly say, how folks can find you, can find your work, maybe a little bit about the upcoming cohort of the Energetic Ecology program.
Sure. Yeah. So I am kind of in the process of rebranding everything, but my website that is now live is Energetic Ecology NW as in Northwest .com. And folks can book sessions with me for only in person for healing sessions and rituals and stuff. But then also, I'm going to be taking a few clients for like virtual one-on-one mentorship. And then the program, Foundations of Energetic Ecology, we have enrollment through June 1st, which is when classes start. And there's also information on my website as to how to apply for a scholarship. I'll be accepting scholarships, I said, through May 25th, but I don't know. I'm like so not about dates and times, and I think you know that, much to everyone's dismay. So around there, if you end up applying after May 25th, just know that it will most definitely at least be considered, that sort of thing. And that will be a year-long container. It is probably going to be the last time that I offer the program in this kind of like live setting. I think when I do offer it in the future, it will probably all be self-guided online. And that is going to probably be true for most of my offerings. I'm feeling like this really big push. And actually, Jonathan and I, we did a reading earlier this year, like just a month or two ago, that kind of pointed in that direction. And I was just like, I don't know if I possibly could just like have an online course available on my website. But I'm really realizing and accepting the fact that, in accepting my role as a healer, like I really just don't have capacity to hold these big spaces in this way.
It's a lot to carry a course, by the way.
Yeah,
It really
and to be
is.
like every single week, for a whole year. And so, if you want to work with me personally in that capacity for a year-long program, then this will be the last year that will be offered in that way. But I will have hopefully some smaller offerings as well available on my website. So, and then I'm also the Energetic Ecologist on Instagram.
Awesome. So thank you, Marika. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your insights. You are just someone who not only thinks about things, but considers things very deeply and hold your role as a healer, as a human with such care and reverence that I'm just so inspired by all you do. So thank you. And I'm sure I'm not the only person who feels like this. So I'm so grateful for you. I have one last question, which is if I offer up the words healing the spirit, which is the name of this podcast, to you, I'm curious what comes up for you. I'm curious about, the challenges that you sense with that idea, the possibilities, and, maybe even what it means to you personally and collective for us to heal the spirit.
Yeah. I feel like and it might be more of like the intentions that you kind of put behind the choosing of those words as like name for your podcast, but I just feel and see this mountaintop and like clear blue sky. I feel inclined to just share that we think that healing the spirit, like it has to be this big kind of much to do about nothing, sort of like, like we have to do these big rituals, or we have to go to these healers and, all these things. And it's just like, this conversation within itself has been very healing for me, and
for me too. Thank you.
Yeah. And I feel like I need to just hold a little bit more space for the more mundane things that can feed me, that can heal me. And also that healing the spirit is not only possible, but it's like, it's a moment to moment thing, like in this moment, I feel very healed, very healed. And that could go away the moment I get off this call, or it could stay with me. And that, the goal of healing isn't to just reach this level of stasis, where we're always feeling lovely and flowy and all of those things, that just being present and honoring what's here and what's present.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you, Marika.
Thank you so much, Jonathan.
That's it for my conversation with Marika Clymer. If you resonate with this conversation and with Marika, which you probably are if you are listening up until this point in our conversation, then I would highly recommend you and encourage you to consider joining Foundations of Energetic Ecology, which is a year-long Reiki training program that Marika is hosting beginning in June 2022. And it is such a beautiful, spacious, transformative container. And I was recently looking back at some of the earlier meetings of this past cohort that I've been a part of, and it's quite incredible to see how all of us has transformed in the course of the past year. And so if that is calling to you, I highly recommend that you check it out. I believe that enrollment is open until the end of May. And if you are listening to this, maybe in early June, I highly recommend that you reach out to Marika and see if there's still space in the program. And also, if you would like, you can always join Marika on her Instagram at the Energetic Ecologist. I believe, yes, I'm going to have all of the links in the show notes. So if I didn't say anything that makes sense, you will get all the links you need over there. But Marika is such a generous and knowledgeable and wise human. And I really feel like, you will benefit from following her and from engaging with her perspective. So if you enjoy this conversation, I would love it if you could share it with people that you think will enjoy it as well or will benefit from it. That's really why I have this podcast and why I record these conversations and share them with the world, because I personally feel like conversations have been the biggest teachers for me, truly. Like listening to different people and their perspectives and really seeing the world and our spiritual practices from many different perspectives and many different lenses have been so transformative for me. And I would love to start a movement, where we share conversations with each other and we share space and we hold space for each of our different perspectives to really emerge and to contribute to the world in a very tangible way. If you feel like giving back to this podcast, thank you, thank you, thank you. I would love to receive your rating, your review on Apple Podcast. I have been told that that is helpful. I do not know how true that is. I'm just going to be honest. But I would love to receive it because I love reading it. And you can also always send me an email to healingthespiritpodcast@gmail.com. I love receiving emails from all of you who have been listening. You can also DM me on Instagram. And yeah, you know where to find me. So I'm sending you so much love, and I'm wishing you an easeful summer. And yeah, thank you for listening.